I want to thank all of you for participating, being here, and being part of the program. What I can say is maybe just an overview of what's happening. And, obviously we all know what's happening. The whole world is exploding. And the way I look at it, and I've heard it before, and you probably heard it before, capitalism is in a downfall. The problem is, will the labor movement pick up their ass and do something about it? And so far, it just means, Steve, and a few of us here in this room that probably are the ones that, moving a lot of, what's going on, even though there's people out on the street. But there's not yet that many people out on the street that relates to what's happening in this country. This is where everything starts from and ends up in other worlds, which is where the theft of their natural resources, as we all know, especially oil. In most of these countries, this country here, bloodthirsty, racist, homophobic, you name it, criminal, and assassin. Everything that's happening in Latin America is basically the outcome of what I believe is the indigenous populations in this part of the Western Hemisphere have been basically invaded by greed and criminality and the killing and genocide of indigenous people. And that's no different than what's happening in Mexico, across the border, and what's happening in South America, in Central America, and Caribbean nations, and also in Africa, and the Middle East. So we have capitalism is alive and well. So, well, at the same time we have in Mexico our involvement many, many years ago with regards to the migration. And of course there was migration prior to that with the guest worker program now, then Bracero slave and enslavement program for the sake of, there weren't enough people to harvest the food, supposedly, during World War II, so they contracted labor here. Basically, they encouraged people to come to this country to develop this state, which now is the 5th largest economy in the world. You think they give a shit about, the reliance on people and human beings to harvest food? Well, at the same time, unbeknownst to many of us, in the last 3 weeks, there's been 3 impacts in regards to the food that we eat and the contamination of E. coli and thousands of people getting sick, and no one really hears about it, except you hear a blurb, don't eat romaine lettuce. But there's other products that are happening. Why is this happening? Because the industry doesn't care. They don't care about consumers. Why don't they care? Because there's no uproar. There's no consumer awareness. That's why we utilize the boycott on this so-called Driscoll strawberry boycott. Basically, there's 2 companies out of San Quintin, Baja California, which is 5.5 hours from the Mexican border. That's not different from anything that's happening in the late 60s with regards to the farm workers movement in this country. But what's happened in the politics of the Democratic Party, we've allowed them to come from the top down to be able to do what they've done well in regards to the continuation of slave and enslavement and cheap wages. Especially, Steve just talked about the first forced migration with regards to the NAFTA treaty. And who put it in there? These so-called neoliberal Democrats. And everyone up to the last guy who just left office, and now we're looking to get rid of this one, is Obama, who wanted to put in the TPP and also dealing with what now we have the so-called USMCA, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. That's happening right now. Well, at the same time, we have all these conflicts with the people against its own government and the corruption. Washington is to blame for what's happening there, has been, always will be, unless we, do something about it at this level. But what do I see as promising in the labor movement? Zilch, nothing. As much as I want to give credit, so, okay, great, Trump goes to Mexico, meets with the new president, who has his hands full, and he's dealing with money and investment. So what does he want? He wants a trade agreement. Why does he want it? Stabilization in regards to the economy in Mexico. Well, that's a whole different matter, but at the same light, we have this whole issue of workers being really, hit hard. We organized and we founded the United Farm Workers Union. And back then, we thought one day the workers are going to take over the union, going to be led by their union, going to be elected by the union. Not so. I'm really, really upset, and probably why I've been able to live this long, is it gives me the drive to say, all that work, all that sacrifice, all that blood, all those jailings, and all those beatings, and for what? When we have the union who supports the corporate establishment and the political party in this country. And where's the union movements? They're not out on the streets. It's other people who are on the streets. Maybe a few people who have joined the ranks. Other people are saying, I'm really concerned about what's happening to me and what's happening to my community, what's happening to my grandkids. And in light of that, what are we going to do about it? Well, for some of us, it's kind of too late. But some of us, not too late, because we're still here and we're doing what we can. And that is important. But when we have this whole question of asking people to take to that whole venue, they got us on the defensive. We're just reacting. Even in my community, or the so-called immigrant community, we're saying, no, it's not about becoming gringos and getting legalized. It's about being able to live in your own effing country and be with your own family and not ever see your family ever again because you can't cross the border because they need the money. It's about struggle, it's about fighting and making sure that we have the option. There is no option for the immigrant community. I hear this, we're looking for the American dream. Okay, that sounds great because you want to escape from the tyranny of what's happening in Mexico in regards to the bloodshed. 190,000 people have been assassinated, murdered, and 29,000 people disappeared. Do you hear an alarm of the American people, of that many people? They wipe out maybe 29, 30 people at a bar in Miami. They're innocent people. We got to feel for them. But does anybody feel for those people and those people that come here forcibly to say, I want the American dream. I want to be legalized. So what the hell's wrong with Yucatan, with the most beautiful cultural part of this North American continent, that you want to leave to come here? When you have a climate that one day Americans are going to have to depend on the tropical fruit that comes out of Mexico to eat. You can't eat oil, but to eat, it's like water. So what do we have? We have a conflict along the border with the maquila industry. Thousands of companies who are making their parts now on that side of the border for trucking, for computers, and for automation and products, you name it. They're not just making, assembling, leather goods with each other. No, they're dealing with highly technical stuff, paying them $6 and $7 and $8 a day, 13 hours and maybe 14 hours a day. Farm workers in 5.5 hours from the Mexican border, while people are going in their dune buggies, to destroy the earth and the soil. They don't see that. They see beautiful beaches and blue water and plenty of beer and Coronas and fish and lobsters, the whole goddamn thing. But do you think they'd say, what about those poor little darkies? Well, we have those in California too. They're all over San Francisco, all over the Mission District. They're in San Jose, they're all over the damn place. But the seriousness about this is that here we go again, full circle, when we have these so-called elections, and people are saying, who are we going to elect? It's a good question. Who's left? Who's there? What are his politics and his issues that he's covering? There's only one person I know of, that you know of. But the rest, a lot of talk, a lot of bullshit. Okay? But all due respect to the working people in this country, we no longer have a working class that in their union, and we saw it in our union, the local 1,000 state workers union, that I worked with state for 23 years as a hearing officer for the Labor Commissioner's Office. Adjudication of labor law. After I left, 18, 20 years of organizing for the Farm Workers Union. This whole dilemma, what would you see? And we see we have to fight now to gain our union and being a democratic and independent union where we elect our own leadership. Today, most unions, and I don't have to name any unions, that's no longer the case. Everything comes from the top. Hardly anything from the bottom. I mean, rank and file. True rank and file. Even in the Farm Workers Union, we have people who are non-farm workers taking leadership in those unions or in those leaders that are basically employees. So anyway, I'm going to just end it with this saying that what we need to do is we need to be able to understand that we can't expect too much when unions have been taken over. The last president of the United Farm Workers Union was Cesar Chavez's son-in-law. Never worked in the fields ever in his life, ever, earning $120,000 and $130,000 and whatever he got under the table. I mean, other venues and other accounts that they had that weren't part of the union, like the retirement system, the medical plan. They served on those boards and they have line items that they can charge off because they're, expenses, whatever. Not farm worker. Before he leaves and says goodbye and packs his bags, he goes over and says, we're going to have a board meeting and I'm going to select the new leader and farm worker leader as the president. It's going to be you, lady. He says, me? Yeah, you. Okay. Why me? I know I'm being kind of facetious, but I'm trying to put some humor in this whole thing. But the bottom line is a joke. Where were the workers who decided who's going to lead them? And when did you meet with the workers? He packed his bags, he took off, he got his retirement after he worked hard, but he took somebody's position as they do in any other unions, okay? And what they did is they usurped the leadership. Where's the union today? Less than 7,000 members. Where's this woman now, who's the newly appointed with a finger saying, you're now the leader of the union that was led by Cesar Chavez? And I say, do we hear anything out in the fields of California? Or you, lady, did you come out of the fields and also come out of that leadership, out of the ranches that they have under union contract? No. I worked in the office. I was a salaried employee with the union. Really? And you're leading a union that should be led by the workers. The leadership should come from the workers. She's out now receiving awards because the nonprofit groups are wanting to have that image of the United Farm Workers Union president is going to receive our award, and she's going to accept it on behalf of the farm workers. Worst of all, she says, we're going to support Kamala Harris for president. How many farm workers out there are supporting Kamala Harris for the candidacy of presidency of this country? I don't hear anybody. That's typical of what's happening with the situation with the labor unions today. And brother, you know, Clarence, this is like a broken record, what I'm talking about. Well, that's what the workers in Mexico are saying. And guess what? In this new trade agreement, it wasn't the AFL-CIO that said, we demand that there be democracy in the trade agreement. And the workers have a right to elect their leadership or whatever. It wasn't him. It wasn't the AFL-CIO. They were making demands. But guess who was? Of all things. And I feel embarrassed to say this while I'm being filmed here. It was Trump. Trump made that a condition only because he says, how do we get these workers to stay in Mexico? Pay them a decent wage. Instead of paying them $7 and $8 an hour a day for 13, 14 hours, let's give them $16 a day.
An hour.
A day. A day. And Trump says, that's a great idea. That sounds great. Too late, Trump. So he goes to Mexico because he sees the law and he finds some flaws. He says, by all means, and for all the rights that go back and forth to workers here in this country and workers there, there's no enforcement. The same thing in 1994. There was never any enforcement. Bill Clinton indicated, oh, you guys are squawking about enforcement and regulations and being able to have the corporations adhere to a decent wage, and, you know, where the products are being harvested, you know, are they being harvested under conditions that are healthy for consumers and also for workers, instead of being sprayed with dangerous chemicals that cause cancers in the fields, let alone forget, you know, people eat that food. Because some people are being told by the chain stores, don't worry about it, just wash the chemicals off of them. You can't wash them. You consume them, and thereafter, God bless you. Hopefully you don't get any cancer, because it's not a funny thing. In my family, I've had several children. Children, not me. Children, and I worked in the fields. I'm saying, when does it end? So the bottom line is that what I'm talking about is that's happening right now. 2020. Workers in the fields in Mexico, workers here. The same company we're boycotting, Andrew and Williamson's, which a company you probably don't hear but they sell all their products to Costco. Tomatoes, cucumbers, spinach, especially strawberries, blackberries, whatever. Forget, you know, Safeway. So Those situations are real here and there, but again, what is the United Farm Workers doing? And where are they right now? I'm saying this only because people can hear me. If some of you are listening, you should find out and go to Google and try to look for the Equitable Food Initiative, which is the United Farm Workers Union and other farm worker groups supposedly, who incorporated into a corporation, nonprofit, to do business with the growers and corporate growers from this country in Mexico, and also with corporate growers in Mexico. What in the world is the United Farm Workers Union doing in Mexico when they should be in Delano, Bakersfield, Fresno, Stockton, and wherever there's any agricultural products here? They're not there. Why are they in San Quintin, Baja California? Behind the backs of the workers? They don't support the Driscoll boycott? And I'll tell you why. It's our assumption that they're working with the growers because they're in the business of the guest worker program. They've now become recruiters from workers in the fields that don't have papers. We're now going to get you legalization. So you're indebted to us, and we're saying, are they really free and independent now? Are they really free? Because when they're in San Quintin, Baja California, the growers there are working with them. And why? Because that's going to be their labor pool for the thousands and thousands of workers. Last year they had 300,000 or more guest workers working in this country. Subjugated under horrible conditions, no different from the last program that's called the Bracero program. Nothing's changed, just the name. Bracero, guest worker means you're a guest, you come and you go back. We don't want you here. Now they need the workers really bad, but are they talking about signing a union contract? Absolutely not. You provide the workers for us, there may be a service fee. So what are they looking for? Economics, money. How much can we make of recruiting slaves for the corporations in this country? And we'll give them a few little benefits like they're doing with that Equitable Food Initiative. Search it out on Google. They need to be exposed. But the problem is they treat our people paternalistically.
They always have.
And they will into the workers' rise and say, we've opened up our eyes. We want our own union that we could do it. That's what they're doing with these workers at General Motors. The minute they tied to the strike in Chicago and some of these Tennessee and assembly plants, they built, some unity. But that's not what the General Motors wanted. That's why they started firing them. And they're blacklisting them, all of them. I hate to use that word, blacklisting, but they're telling them, you can't get a job anymore. Same thing with the farm workers. They did the same thing. That's an old method. So what are we saying? We're saying we have a serious problem with regards to the rank and file and the young people in this country. And I think the only way it's going to happen is education and orientation, and also pushing the button with workers and saying nothing's going to change. Okay? So the bottom line is, what I'm saying is to you is that support the boycott, Driscoll boycott, pass the word on to other people, and we should be passing it on to more and more unions, because even our chief labor representatives don't believe in boycotts. And to me, that's the only true weapon next to the strike. But you don't last long in a strike after 40 days like the auto workers. they're into trouble with regards to how to survive because of the pressures at home with surviving food and paying the bills and the rent. So the boycott is one tool that needs to be, it's the most powerful. We won the boycott, the great boycott. In 3 years, we didn't have a Facebook, we didn't have internet, we didn't even have a phone, let alone a cell phone.
And I was in Florida not eating grapes or lettuce.
So anyway, I'm going to stop right there and just say this, the maquila workers in the border and the farm workers here and the farm workers in San Quintin, nothing's changed, it's gotten worse. So I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you so much.
And also, we want to support the fired GM workers in Sinaloa, the General Motors, Mexico General Motors workers, because they have been basically victimized because of their solidarity action with the GM workers in the United States. You had a question?
Quick for brother, hey, I can't tell you how pleased I am that to see you here again. I saw you the first time when I came to Scotland in the late 80s, and you were my inspiration. Right now, I think you mentioned something that is calling my attention that I didn't know about these 200,000 or more guest workers right now. I wonder, are they all from Mexico or from all over the world?
Mostly Mexico.
Because I don't know if you heard that El Salvador and Guatemala are being pushed by the U.S. And I think they signed already something to bring guest workers to Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico.
Oh, yeah.
What is that all about?
Well, they're expanding the program because there's more and more people have shifted to other jobs. In other words, higher paying jobs. So that leaves a vacuum. So they have to fill that vacuum. And by doing that, it just, opening up the market more for people to so-called legitimize their being able to come into this country. But they're not free. They're not free to move around. They're kept with one employer. And if they don't have enough work, they end up in camps or they get sick and they have to, ship them back to Mexico. And a lot of times they're mistreated. They don't get the care and health care, and they get sick. That's been the biggest problem in regards to workers that have been contracted to this country through the Mexican government, U.S. government, and also the corporations or the companies here. And in Mexico, you have, like they have here, company unions who take control of the workforce, even much more so. In regards to pesticides and chemical spraying and sexual abuse and the right to fire you at any time they want. They can talk a lot of things about how we have protections for workers and the Mexican government, even the president of Mexico, but the bottom line is that it's about enforcement. And right now what it looks like is that the Mexicans are saying, we don't want anybody coming and telling us what to do in our country. But they're avoiding the whole thing about labor unions and the labor unions coming in to put pressure on the government. And they don't want any work stoppages, any strikes. They want everything go nice and let the flow of goods come through. But at the same time, I think Richard Trumka did mention we need to put enforcement that has mechanisms of application and enforcement and relates to products. If the corporation's not abiding by the labor laws and they're not respecting that, then there's only one way: stop the product from coming in until they resolve and deal with this whole problem of the grievances, whatever, with the workers.
Right. So, if you might, I would like to clarify, if you can. Governments on this program are not involved, isn't it? Just via corporations.
Repeat that again.
Governments, it's just the corporations. This is a corporate trade agreement. I mean, in other words, this is not a workers' trade agreement. This is a corporate trade agreement.
Right.
which will allow U.S. corporations to continue to go into Mexico and control the Mexican workforce. The recolonization of Mexico through their buying up the trains, buying up the oil, buying up the
Ports.
the ports, this will continue. And the unions, U.S. unions that are supporting that have accepted it. This is why the Democrats say they're against Trump, but they're supporting an agreement with Trump, the USMCA. If you're against Trump, are they saying, the unions are saying now that are supporting this agreement, they're in line with Trump in Mexico.
So maybe I didn't, I wasn't clear enough. I'm talking about like El Salvador, right? They just signed an agreement of about 10 to 20,000 workers. So if the U.S. government is not involved in that. It's just corporations, or is the United States?
No, the U.S. issues a visa to those workers.
Yeah, and I'm talking about working conditions.
Well, working conditions apparently is the authority of the state government and also federal government. But the bottom line it comes down to is enforcement. Who's going to enforce those laws and regulations? If you don't have mechanisms that deals with protecting those workers, it doesn't happen.
But the other thing is Richard Trumka, the AFL-CIO, the UAW, have not said one word about the fired workers in Mexico.
Right.
Rockwell Automation, where the workers were fired there. Workers were fired in the Matamoros rebellion. Workers were fired at General Motors. Not one word is said, rehire these workers. Now, how can you talk about defending the working class of Mexico and equality when you don't even mention the fact that they fired the workers illegally and they're still without work? I mean, if you can't defend the workers who've been fired, how are you going to defend the workers that are left there? You'll continue to have company unions. So what we have to do is build a movement in solidarity with the fired workers in Mexico. We have to say that the GM workers, these other fired workers in Tecate have to be defended. That is real solidarity. I don't believe that the government of the United States, which doesn't even stop workers from being fired here for forming unions.
See, the government...
16,000 workers are fired every year who form unions. We're going to help the Mexicans defend labor rights. We can't even defend the labor rights of American workers? What the hell is that?
Well, what you have here with regards to this whole question of the old system in Mexico, at least, the predominant that they had structured in the political party and the government in Mexico before the new government came in, is there was a tie-in with the company unions they called charro unions. And those charro unions were corrupt, and part of the corruption also with the corporations, Mexican corporations and U.S. corporations. The Driscolls corporations and all these other corporations that I mentioned and others that are there in Mexico, they play that game where they are part and complicit of that corruption, where they sign with protection contracts, which basically are now illegal. In other words, they protect the employer, they don't protect the workers, and that's why these workers at General Motors and many others, farm workers and also workers who are trying to organize right now, they're being beat up, they're using violence, intimidation, and threats, and the government says, yeah, go ahead and protect your workers. But that's not the case. The bottom line is that there's no enforcement. So here you have the labor secretary, from the Mexican labor secretary, who is the only means to be able to enforce the law. They have no mechanisms, no regulations, no laws that enforce them with that authority. I mean, I was a labor commissioner. We have laws here in California that relates to how much enforcement. But at least you have some laws, but unless a worker comes in and files a complaint, unless you go out to the fields, and what the state did, and I'll say it here publicly, they do it once a year, just before Christmas. Let's go do a roundup and go get 2,000 citations, and we did our job for the rest of the year. The rest of the time, they can go to the office and file a complaint individually. But when we went out to the fields it was kind of, like a class action suit. You're talking about thousands of workers being filed actions against by the Labor Commissioner's Office or the Workforce Agency for the state. The state right now is culpable of non-enforcement as it relates to, as much as they want to argue, even with me, and saying, no, the fact is you do not enforce the law. The people come to see you if they find out about you. You really think a Spanish-speaking person's gonna walk in and have no papers and file a complaint in regards to the employer? That violated, there's a section in the labor code that says it's illegal for an employer to demand and force a worker to work in an environment that is against their health and welfare and they may get injured. It's a crime. And do you think that they go out and do that only after the person's dead or in the hospital and their arm's gone? Maybe. But sometimes, the employer is corrupt and covers it up with, we'll pay you under the table, don't file a workman's comp claim. Because it's a crime. But this whole question about workers in this country, forget about, the border in Mexico. Even right now, in that new law that they passed, which it looks like a great law, they're going to allow, inspectors from this country and inspectors from that country and come together and go and inspect, where there's violations that happen and people have denounced it and filed complaints. Well, now they allowed, which there was a congressman from Mexico, federal congressman, that told us straight out, I'm opposed to the what do you call it, outsourcing. Outsourcing is a new game in town, where basically they reclassify you and they downgrade you to certain wage levels, and now they're making you a second class. I'll give you an example. At the Volkswagen plant in Mexico, Central Mexico, you have 34,000 members. Only 8,000 members are considered rank and file, the rest are not. What's so different of one human being to another if they're working, doing the same classification, but they decided to now change it? We're going to downgrade your classification to now you don't get any benefits until you wait 5, 10, 15 years, whatever.
On this NAFTA 2.0, what are the big gains for AFL-CIO?
I would say null and void. I don't really believe there's been any real gains. It's like
how Trump will do something like that right now when it's not even a year from election.
they're supposed to be voided. Are they going to void them? How is it going to happen? Maybe years. In the meantime, what should have happened is it should have voided those contracts immediately and allow the workers to go into sessions to negotiate those, or even have the right to affiliate to found their own unions and then negotiate contracts. Have they done that? They say, from this point on, once we pass the law, every union that's a union today can be challenged by other workers, as far as
the 7,000 across the nation, or where? 7,000?
Nationally. Nationally, in Mexico. 7,000 contracts. There's no independent movement, labor movement in this country.
No.
None. And the reason for that is exactly what he just said. The Democratic Party and the union higher-ups need each other because the unions are the fat cow. They provide the money and the numbers of people out in the street in order to get the vote out, when it should be the other way around. So you're the Democratic Party, we're the Labor Party. We select our own leadership and we're our own candidates. We don't allow the Democratic Party to come and tell us the labor movement and the Labor Party, the independent Labor Party, what candidates will you support or not? If you want to negotiate, then we need so many people here in these positions here, and you support them too, even though, we're not together, that we'll work with one another.
That's why I was asking you earlier that what is the hook then, because if you say that there is no independent union movement anymore, then what?
No, I meant there's no independent Labor Party
Right.
that's organized.